All right. Welcome, everyone, to tonight's meeting of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter of SABR. I'm Bruce McClure, the chapter chair, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner-Waterman chapter of SABR in Vermont, Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. Now, we got a big crowd tonight. It's going to be a great meeting tonight, but I want to kick it off with a couple of announcements. One coming from my guy, Jeff Cohen. Jeff, tell us what's going on with that pod, would you?
Sure. On Baseball and Barbecue podcast on all your podcast apps this week, we have Jim Gosker. If you don't remember Jim Gosker, he was an original Seattle Pilot.
Yeah.
He was on the 69 Mets, the 73 Mets. He also played for the Giants and the Expos. And he has such great stories to tell. And so tune into Baseball and BBQ on all your podcast apps. And coming up, hopefully soon, with his new book, David Krell.
And he's here tonight as well.
He is, yes.
That's right. So if you are not listening to Baseball and Barbecue, you are missing out huge, because Baseball and Barbecue is about our two favorite things, baseball and good food. I mean, really, all your podcatchers have it. If you haven't tuned it in to grab that each week, do it at the end of this meeting. All right. Last week, Alan Tate of Grimsby, Ontario, was recognized as the recipient of the 2025 SABR Founders Day Award, which recognizes a member who has contributed significant or enduring service as a leader of a regional chapter or research committee. Alan's been a SABR member since 1976, took over as president of the Hanlan's Point chapter in 2005 following SABR 35 in Toronto, and has served in a leadership role for the past 2 decades. I want to take this moment to say on behalf of the Clyde Sukeforth chapter, congratulations, Alan. It's well-deserved, and it's a prestigious new award that SABR has created, and we are so happy that you are the first recipient. All right. Let's go. Here we go. Is there a discernible point when baseball truly becomes the national pastime? Perhaps the question isn't so much when, but how. This presentation will propose that the concept of baseball as the national pastime was an evolutionary process with 3 significant stages of increased cultural awareness. Rapid geographic expansion gave rise to calls that baseball was the national pastime. No place baseball points to exceptional participation rates after the Civil War. The concept of community over club identification helped embed baseball deep into American culture, and all contributed to baseball being thought of as the national pastime. SABR member Marty Payne is a member of the Bob Davids and Babe Ruth chapters and the 19th century and the dead ball era committees. He's researched, written, and presented baseball history for 35 years, with his essays appearing in several publications. Marty has given presentations before the National SABR Convention in Baltimore, the Symposium on Baseball and American Culture, the Frederick Ivor Campbell Conference on 19th Century Baseball, regional SABR meetings, and area historical societies. Marty Payne, welcome to Northern New England. Unmute yourself. How are you tonight, my friend?
I am fine. Thanks for having me.
We are so happy that you are doing this for us. Molly is going to run your presentation for you. There it is coming up on the screen right now, and I'm getting out of the way. It's all yours. Go.
Okay. This is a presentation I did at the 19th Century Conference back in April, and I heard some names coming on here that were there. So I don't remember if they were there for this presentation or not, but it's the same one basically. You can move the slide, Molly. Okay. I want to start off with a couple of maps to illustrate how baseball spreads. And the one on the right is from the Origins website, which I use from time to time. I find it very useful. The map on the left is from the Railways Guide, not so much for the railroads, but it does illustrate the transportation network that baseball follows. Now, in 1850, of course, we're talking about the New York game, the basis of the modern game. And at that point, it is definitely just the New York game. It's spilled a little bit outside of New York and a little bit into New Jersey, but it's basically New York. There are other games evolving, particularly in New England, and also town ball in Philadelphia. So it's not the only game around. That starts to change. Molly, if you can move it to the next slide. In the 1850s, and you can see what's happening to the transportation network. It's spreading out, and baseball is sort of following that. You can see how it's moved up into New England during the 1850s, and it's actually replacing the New England game there. It's doing the same thing in Philadelphia. It's gone into all of the East Coast cities, or most of them anyhow. It's jumped over into the Midwest and the major metropolitan centers. It's actually jumped across the Great American Desert to the Pacific Coast and a couple of odd spots in between. At this point, I think baseball is primarily a metropolitan experience. There are exceptions to that. There are certainly some places in rural areas that sort of have found baseball, but that seems to be an exception rather than the rule, at least from what I can see. What happened in Baltimore and these cities, I think, is a good example of what's happened everywhere, in that a fellow named George Beam had business connections in Brooklyn, and they just happened to be Harry Polhemus and Joe Leggett of the Brooklyn Excelsior. And when Beam saw one of these New York games, he was fascinated by it. And he asked Polhemus and Leggett, whoever, to come down and teach his friends how to play, which is what they did. Polhemus doesn't seem to be too concerned about converting all of Baltimore. He's just teaching Beam's friends how to play, and they sort of pass it along from there. Now you have a game that's, being played by the same rules. It's being played in all the metropolitan areas. It's continental in scope, and some people start to call it the national pastime, and I certainly wouldn't disagree with that at all. But I would say that it's just the first step of that process. The next step is really, next two steps come after the Civil War, I think. And again, you can see the transportation network spreading out. Baseball is following that. But something else is happening here. If you look at the origins map on the right, it indicates that there's a lot of activity sort of backfilling. The transportation network is going into places, smaller cities, towns, villages, and places like that. And baseball is following that. And for the most part, and again, this is a generalization, but it replaces a lot of the very rural, informal games like Ocat and Rounders. Some say they're pretty much the same thing. But it begins to take more of a root in the rural areas at this point. Okay, Molly, you can go next time. And to look at those two steps, I want to look at the eastern shore of Maryland, which is where I'm from, and do a lot of my research. And as you can see, it's east of the Chesapeake Bay, and geographically, it's actually larger. It's a larger area than the state of Delaware. And after the Civil War, you're talking about 3,000 square miles and only 150,000 people. So it's a pretty scattered population. And your major population centers top out at 2,000. There's only 3 of those. There are some towns, smaller towns, and about a score of these larger villages. And baseball is happening in all of these places. But then something happens, what I call no place baseball, where teams are forming in places where there's no population base to support it. And it always intrigued me that baseball is being played in these places. And that's what sort of got me going in this direction. So Molly, you can go to the next slide. This is a article from a newspaper, local newspaper, that really sort of describes what's going on after the Civil War. Uh, it's written by either George Grattan or one of his salesmen. Grattan opened the Baltimore Baseball Emporium in the fall of 1866. His objective was to serve the Baltimore Baseball Convention, which was growing every year. And he also wanted to expand his market through the whole state of Maryland. And his strategy is sort of laid out in this article. One of the first things he mentions is the Knickerbockers, and he emphasizes them not as the inventors of the game, but as the first celebrities of the game, first, to really make a name for themselves. So he was emphasizing the Knickerbocker style of play. He also emphasizes that, after 20 years of 1845, when the Knickerbockers come on the scene, that baseball is finally coming into smaller towns and villages. And he actually goes on to describe or lays out the New York rules for 1866. So everything you need to form a team is sort of contained in this article. And Grattan came to Baltimore actually by way of Syracuse, by way of England. So he had an extensive travel to get here. And the salesmen, they take out notices in the local newspapers, and what they're selling is physical fitness and social standing in the Baltimore Baseball Convention. So what they're selling is the Knickerbocker style of play, which is a more informal, maybe a little more intramural than what's happening by this time in a lot of other places. They look maybe a little more competitive. But most of the towns on the Eastern Shore, when they form, or most of the clubs that form, they're forming as like the Knickerbockers would, not so much competitive. There are exceptions to that on the northern part of the peninsula. They seem to be more competitive right out of the gate, but most everybody is forming as if they were Knickerbocker wannabes, basically. So they're forming as private clubs. There's no real identification with the community at large. And if they're playing as Knickerbockers, there's a lot of emphasis on the intramural part of it. Now, we know there's a lot of activity from the newspapers and social and match games, but intramural games don't get covered. But I've come across, mentions of teams that formed, and that's all they wanted to do was play intramural. There was also 4 clubs that were included from the Eastern Shore, included in the Baltimore Baseball Convention. But I never found where they played a social or match game. That doesn't mean they didn't, but it suggests that maybe they were more concerned with playing intramural, just playing amongst themselves. So when you form a team as a club and you have 2 nines, because if you play a social game, you need at least 20 players, because you play a first 9 and a second 9. Intramural is the same way. You need a minimum of 20. 30 is probably better for no-shows and that kind of thing. It's also better because your financing comes from membership and dues. And so the more people you have and the more friends and family you have involved, the better off you are. So most of these teams are forming as if they were forming as Knickerbockers. And there's a lot more activity going on, I think, than we give credit to because of these intramural, the emphasis on the intramural. Okay, Molly, you can move to the next slide. Wow, what happened there? This is actually a scorebook. You don't see it very well there. I don't know why it came over that way, but anyhow, it's a very rare rural scorebook. And a couple of years ago, I went to the 19th century convention and or conference with the idea of putting this before a lot of wiser 19th century heads than my own to establish a date for it, because the scorekeeper, Miss Bessie Collison, didn't date the book. So we sort of looked at it and used, I guess, circumstantial evidence and whatever to form the idea or the opinion that this book was probably around 1870, plus or minus about 2 years. There were a number of reasons for that, but one of the reasons is that in this scorebook, there are no social or match games from outside teams. It's strictly an intramural book, and every time they get together, there are a first 9 game, and a second 9 game. There's no set rosters. From one event to another, the players are interchangeable. And they have 40 regular members. And, so what's the big deal about 40 members on this baseball? Okay, go to the next slide. Linkwood is the name of the team. It's the Linkwood Club. And just to the right where it says East Newmarket is Linkwood. Now, at the time that we've dated the book, 1870, Linkwood was a railroad depot and a warehouse, and that's it. All this other stuff comes at a later date. This map is actually from 1878. It's a federal land map. And what's listed there for for Linkwood, that's as big as it ever got. That's Linkwood at its peak. It's been downhill ever since. And so there was nobody there. And just like 8 miles to the north, there's a small town of about 1,000. To the west is one of the towns of about 2,000, about 7 miles away. There's a large village to the east, but they're not drawing any of their players from those towns. They're drawing it where you see the red dots. I did a little genealogical work from the names in the book, and I found that most of them appeared to have lived just in around that area. And being a federal land map, they enter all the names of all the property owners, so you can see how sort of sparsely populated it is. And for a place like this to have a team with 40 members, just sort of, I found it incredible. And one of the things, they were drawing people really out of the woods and the fields to play. And one of the interesting things is, out of those 40 players, I found about 15 of them, maybe, and they were all age appropriate. Nobody was over the age of 30, so they weren't, sort of tapping, the 40s and 50-year-olds just to get people to play. These were legitimate players. And one of the interesting things to me is this is repeatable when you look at some of the other places. Molly, you can go to the next one. One of the first teams to form in all of the Eastern Shore was a place called Head of Sassafras. And if you read these descriptions here, excerpts from the newspaper, it would seem that Head of Sassafras were forming a team primarily to save their souls. They seem to be a pretty rough bunch or something, but they're looking to form a team. It's 1866. They need 20 or 30 players, right? So this is Head of Sass. Oh, I'm sorry. I keep trying to move. Molly, you can move to the next one. I'm sorry. This is Head of Sassafras right here in circa 1866. There's not even a railroad here. There's, you've got a fork in the road. You have the head of the Sassafras River, which is a tributary of the Chesapeake, which makes it commercial network and a commercial place. But again, like Lakewood, when you look around it, there's really nothing close by. So they're drawing people from, again, out of the woods and the fields, almost literally. To me, all of this suggests a really exceptional participation rate that maybe we didn't, or at least I haven't considered before, because we know there's a lot of activity with social and match games being reported in the papers, but when you add the intramural and you add these no place places, it really suggests an even greater participation rate. It's like everybody is playing baseball, and pickleball has nothing on this, and so yeah, everybody's playing it. If it's not the national pastime now, I don't know when it's going to be. But there's one thing sort of different here, and um, and you know, you can go to the next slide, Molly. Um, they're just the participation rate is so great. You know, I think we've underestimated it, and like I said, if it's not the national pastime now, I don't know when it's going to be. However, it's it needs something else because baseball is still more or less a fad, at least in my opinion, at this point. Yeah, it's very popular uh, in a lot of places, but it really hasn't caught on all the way just yet. And I think that happens around 1872 with the rule changes. And I think the important rule change here is the one that allows a snap of the wrist or the elbow when you deliver a pitch. Before, it was supposed to be a stiff arm delivery. Now, that allows you, the snapping the wrist or the elbow allows you to put 10 or 15 more miles an hour on a pitch. It also allows you to break the ball in just about any direction. Now, this rule was, it seems that it was loosely enforced in a lot of the metropolitan areas by this time. That's probably one of the reasons why they changed it. But in a lot of these rural areas, the New York game was new to them. And so they took the rule book out with them onto the field and sort of guide them. So if there was any disagreement or confusion, they would pull out the book and usually interpret it by the letter of the rules. So when they made this change in the rural areas, game becomes more physical and aggressive, and it happens pretty quickly. And you can really see the difference in game accounts. In the 1860s, baseball seems to be reported as a social event more than anything else. But in the 1870s, games are now reported as competitions. So, yeah, it's much more physical. There's actually an account of a catcher who has to be replaced in the fifth inning. His hands were busted. His arms bloodied and bruised. Another catcher ran to get the ball to throw out a runner that was trying to steal, and he got hit in the head with a bat. He was in a coma for 5 days, and they didn't think he was going to live. But 2 weeks later, he lived long enough to at least play first base for the next game. There's another account of a pitcher, which comes in the 1880s, but is applicable to the 1870s, in that there's no rule regarding hitting a batter with a pitch. It's just a dead ball. You don't get a base. Pitcher doesn't get fined. So there was this one guy, every time he pitched, when the opposing pitcher came to the plate, he would just drill him, hit him, and repeatedly. And that was part of his pitching strategy. You also read about reports throughout Maryland and other places of like somebody getting hit with a pitch in the chest, and and it killed him. And there's a couple of guys down in Georgia who got in a scrap both picked up a bat and went at it. One of them got killed. So the game is much, much different. And like I said, it happens pretty quickly. Not everybody wants to play anymore. Is Lakewood going to get 40 members now? I doubt it. Rosters shrink right up. There's no more second nines anymore. Social games, that's gone, and it happens in the space of a year. And when the rosters shrink, you might think that your expenses, are relative to the number of players, but it's really not. When baseball starts out in the 1860s and you've got a 30-member club plus family and friends, when another club comes to town, it's a social game. The reason why you're playing is to have a party more than anything else. So it's a matter of hospitality. You have 2, 3, maybe even 400 people coming into town, and they're expecting entertainment and food and that kind of thing. So one club to another, that's one thing. But the roster shrink to 10 or 12, and they're all like in their 20s, then you don't have that means to entertain and feed such a large crowd. So they turn to the communities for money. And it starts out as honorary members, but that doesn't last more than a year or so. Once the money starts coming from the community, then the community takes over. So they're not private clubs anymore. Before they were like the Elks or the Kiwanis or the Moose Club. You were all by yourself. There was no real community identity. But once the community starts putting the money into it, then they start dictating how things are going to be run. And I think this is a very important transition for baseball to become the national pastime, is this community identity, and it happens really, really quick. Molly, you can move the slide. And right away, one of the first things that happens is that there's this board of directors forms, and they sell stock or season tickets or subscriptions or whatever you want to call them. Businesses are solicited. Local government gets involved right away, if not with money, then at least with building a field that the town team can play on now. And that's what's happening. Now there's a number one town team. They might have more than one team, but there's always the number one team. Ladies auxiliaries are extremely important as fundraisers, box lunches, dances, bake sales, and God knows what else. There were times when ladies auxiliaries raised enough money where they demanded and got the right to say how that money was going to be spent. Fundraising became a year-round. You had to do it year-round to get the money. These teams generated so much interest and money that usually it's very rare for one person to sponsor, or one person or one business. It was definitely a community activity. And during the off season, you might see minstrel shows or vaudeville shows, boxing matches. Later on, movies were all used to help raise funds. And baseball was so popular that you're talking about towns of 1,000 or 2,000 at the most, villages, but they would take 100, 200, 300, 400 people with them on trains or steamboats. Sometimes steamboats, they would tie up a sloop or a schooner in the back and put all the baseball people in it and tow them wherever they needed to go. It was not unusual for, say, a baseball game in a town of 1,000 to draw that many people, a crowd equal to its population. And so people knew baseball to be the social event of the summer season. That's where you went to see or be seen. There was really nothing that could compare to it or compete with it. The closest thing would be the county fairs, but they only lasted a week. Baseball was pretty much May through September, and so people were all the time, um, going and planning excursions for that. And of course, the merchants saw all these people coming into town, and they saw an opportunity to make money. So right away, baseball becomes part of everyday life, where before it was just something these clubs did. Now it's a community event. And so, yeah, Molly, you can go to the next one, I think. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the White Cloud of Salisbury, because I think they embody this 1872-ish switch from club to community. They're from Salisbury, Maryland, and Salisbury had a team in the 1860s, and it was actually run by a young man who would later become governor of Maryland. But that team and the governor would eventually be forgotten because of the White Cloud. The White Cloud would change that narrative, and they would become the original Salisbury team, even though they weren't. The guy standing second from the left, holding the baseball, is named Stanley Toadvine, and he had gone to Princeton and learned how to play cricket. He was actually a bowler, and when he came home in the late 1860s, baseball, of course, was all the rage. But Toadvine wasn't interested at all. He set up his law practice. He bought into a local newspaper. But then they changed the rule in 1872, and that's when Toadvine changed his mind about baseball, because he said, now it's a man's game. Now there's no more of this stiff arm lollipop tossing it in. It's a man's game. Now it's time to play. So he forms the White Cloud. And these are the 9 original members. Now, that number would become more like 15 or 16 people would be granted original White Cloud membership, I guess, because it became such a prestigious thing to be known. Not because they were a good team, even though that they were. In 1878, the Wilmington Quickstep came down for a 2 out of 3 series, bringing some National League players with them, and the Quickstep were promptly beaten in 2 games. So yeah, they were a good team, but I think they're remembered for other reasons as well. These original 9 members, Toadvine's the oldest of the bunch. Most of them, being a small town of about 2,000, they all went to the same school. A lot of them went to the same church. A couple of them married teammates' sisters. And when they formed, this team formed in 1872, Salisbury was a town of about 2,000. 50 years later, within their generation, Salisbury was more like 12 to 14,000 and still growing. And these guys were part of that development or progress. They were the businessmen, they were the bankers, the lawyers, the judge, and people remembered them as being part of that progress and being leaders in the community. And one of the interesting things about it is most of these guys stayed in Salisbury. I'm not sure exactly how many of the 15 or 16, I would say 10 or 11, not more, stayed in Salisbury and were part of this development of the town. And in fact, Molly, you can go ahead and move next one. In 1923, the commissioner of baseball came rolling into Salisbury because they had this Class D minor league at the time. And they couldn't do anything right. They broke about every rule there was in organized baseball. So Landis came down to sort of straighten things out, but he always made it look like a social visit, even though it wasn't. And here he is, he's talking to three of the still living 6 members of the White Cloud. And he was just shocked that not only 6 of them were still alive after all those years, but they all stayed in Salisbury. We're all part of this progress. The guy standing next to Landis, a guy named H.S. Todd, he was like, president of the Rotary Club for life, and he was always contributing to the baseball team. He actually started a company in the 1870s that's still in operation today. And all these guys, all these guys, as they aged out, they contributed to having or perpetuating baseball. Molly, you can move to the next slide. There was one guy named S.E. Gordy who was a banker, and in the 1890s, he decided to build Gordy Park, and he maintained the field for 30 years, and that was the main field for the town team for all that time. And as long as Gordy took care of it, that was one less expense for the town team. They could spend that money on players or whatever else they wanted to do. The guy on the right here is Toadvine in his later years, and people remembered him. He was a prosecuting attorney. He was a judge, a delegate, a senator, a newspaper editor, very much involved in the community. The guy on the left, L.W. Gunby, he was sort of the Walmart of the 19th century, I guess. By 1900, he had nearly 30,000 square feet of retail space in downtown Salisbury. Sold everything from mops and brooms to motorcycles to farm tractors. And these guys, as they aged out, these what I call original or participants, as they aged out, they're the ones that would join the board of directors, or as Gordy did, contributed in some way to perpetuating baseball. And that just didn't happen in Salisbury, but that happened, in virtually in every little town and village on the Eastern Shore. Somebody was coming along, and they would be that board of directors, and they would make sure that baseball continued. Next slide, Molly, if you would. So, sort of wrapping this up, the 3 steps are the expansion into commercial and population centers in the late 1850s, which gives rise to the concept of it being a national pastime. But just as importantly, and maybe more importantly, this no-place baseball and intramural baseball suggests an even greater participation rate than we might have thought. And then I think the transition from club-based to community-based teams is really what brings baseball into everyday rural culture. So, and then for my last slide, if you would, Molly, I did write a book a couple years ago on baseball on Maryland's Eastern Shore, where I tried to sort of follow the path of the beginnings through the Class D minor league era, which ends around 1949. And that's available online, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon and such. So that's what I have for you. So, thank you.
That was very in-depth and detailed, Marty. We appreciate that. I've got a question for you, connecting it to today's game, and I may be off base, but I'm going to ask it and see what your opinion is. Do you believe that on any level at all, baseball could be considered the national pastime today?
I'm not sure. I think it could be because it's still very popular at sort of a grassroots level. I mean, you still got your little league and your high school and travel ball at those levels. Um, you might not have uh, the everyday enthusiasm that you once had, as far as adult teams go. Uh, but you know, I think that's kind of a matter of opinion, whether it is or not. I'm not sure if I have one.
You touched on somebody's got some feedback there. Well, hopefully that'll straighten out. You touched on high school games, little
Right.
league games, and things like that. And I love people who discuss baseball by immediately saying baseball is a dying sport, and they point to whatever sparsely attended game they saw on television a couple of weeks ago and say, look at that. Look. It's a dying sport. And yet you have a very good um, analogy there that there's so much baseball being played and consumed on levels other than major league that yeah, I think that you could still to this day consider baseball the national pastime, if only on levels behind that of Major League Baseball. Bruce Allardyce in the chat would like to recommend Marty's book. So there is your ringing endorsement for the evening for Bruce Allardyce, because if anybody's going to recommend a book, he's gonna give you a good one. Ryan McClanahan in the chat. Rob Manfred said that he wants to expand Major League Baseball into a few other cities now. That is true. There was a report that came out today that says Manfred wants the expansion and the reorganization of Major League Baseball done by the time he retires in 2029. We've got some folks who are wanting to ask some questions of David Krell tonight. If you have a question of David Krell, he's going to be the first up in just a minute. Of Marty Payne, it's a professional act, folks. If you have a question tonight for Marty Payne, our presenter, go down to the bottom of the screen and hit the react button. Once you hit that, you're going to see another button marked raise hand. Raise your hand like 4 people have already. We'll get you in line to ask some questions. First up, fellow author David Krell. David, go.
Marty,
Yes.
good evening. At the 19th Century Conference and in the journals, there is scant research compared to the East Coast when we're talking about the West Coast. I always feel that the Midwest and the West Coast get short shrift. And as you were speaking, I did some Googling and I found an essay by John Thorne from 12 years ago, where he talks about baseball dating back perhaps to the early 1850s in San Francisco. And I'm wondering if you've had the opportunity to do any research or come across any information regarding the transition westward of baseball or offshoots of baseball. I know the game evolved, so whether it was Old Cat or baseball, the Massachusetts game, whatever it may be, how did it get 3,000 miles away when transportation was basically quaint, to put it lightly?
Yeah, that's a good question. But a lot of the people playing baseball early on, like the Knickerbockers, they joined the club as a social club or as a club that where you would help each other succeed in life. I guess is the way, and a lot of these guys, what's the saying? Go west, young man. I forget who said that, but um, that's what a lot of these folks did. They might have been playing baseball in the 1840s or 50s, but then they might have had a business opportunity, say in Cincinnati, or you had the gold rush, in California, so that attracted people. So wherever somebody that had played baseball, say on the East Coast, had went west, they were taking baseball with them. And if they loved the game, then they were teaching the game to wherever they went. That way, they would have the opportunity to play. So I haven't done a whole lot of research on the West Coast. I do know from several years ago, Barry McRae, there was a couple of guys out around the state of Washington or Oregon that had done a lot of early research in the late 1860s, baseball starting there. So it's starting on the West Coast in a lot of places just as early as it is on the East Coast. There is some time lag, but it's surprising how early it does start in a lot of places in the West. But I'm not too familiar with any other games going west other than the New York game. I've not read of any, New England or Massachusetts game going west or anything like that. I'm sure OCAT and Rounders did, but a lot of times those games just didn't get coverage, in newspapers like the New York game did.
I think what we learned here is that the East Coast bias is a longstanding tradition in professional baseball. Next up, look who's here. It is the president of the New York Giants Preservation Society, Gary Mintz. Gary, go.
Thanks, Bruce. Marty, great presentation. Really, what great research. You mentioned the National Pastime, and you read poems and legends and people having nicknames and all these great stuff, especially when I was, younger. I remember all this stuff. And I think Bruce was basically stating, where did the National Football League now take hold today?
Yeah.
As, something that really needs to be reckoned with. And, baseball has fallen behind in my eyes. I mean, I love watching football. I love watching baseball, but I know that baseball seems to take a backseat to football these days, unless I'm wrong.
Well, yeah, there's an argument for that. I think football does attract. It's that event attraction where it's Sunday, and everything just stops and people go. And baseball was like that at one time. I mean, what I can see what was happening on the Eastern Shore of Maryland was, if there was a game day, you'd shut down. Businesses would shut down till after the game and then reopen so they could make some money. But it was, kids would call in sick, kids that had jobs, would, the grandmother would die 3 times during a year, and people just went to the baseball games. Like I said, it would draw crowds equal to populations of the towns. And, baseball still can draw, but football seems to have that mentality of it's Sunday, drop everything. That's what we're doing. And I think that's part of the definition of the national pastime. So.
Thank you, Marty.
I remember a article that I read years ago. This goes back to probably late 70s, early 80s, discussing how Major League Baseball had fallen behind football. So I'm not necessarily sure that it is a new idea that has happened. Ryan McClanahan in the chat, NFL today, the length of time of the season is shorter, and we've got short attention spans. I'm right there with you, Ryan. I believe Jeff Cohen, co-host of the Baseball Barbecue podcast.
That's
Yours
right.
next. You're up.
Thanks. I'm still going to say that baseball is a national pastime. I think football does a great job marketing itself, and again, yes, with the shorter season and short attention spans, it definitely But I still love baseball. I think it's the national pastime. My question to you, Marty, are you familiar with a couple of books that were recently released a couple of years ago? The New York Game by Kevin Baker and How Baseball Happened by Thomas Gilbert, because they both talk about how expansion happened going west through the rail lines. I was wondering if you are familiar with these publications.
I've read Tom's book. Yes, yes. Mr. Baker's I'm not familiar with, but Tom, yeah, I've read that. Yeah.
Kevin Baker's book is called The New York Game, Baseball and the Rise of a New City, and I know he's going to come out with a second edition.
Yeah.
But it was actually a very good book. I suggest reading it.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thanks, Jeff. I believe Bruce Allardyce was next. If I am going out of order, I apologize. Bruce,
Well,
unmute,
Bruce,
my friend. You're up.
one Bruce to another. Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
Well, Dave Krell actually asked sort of some of the questions I was going to ask, but about the westward expansion. But just a few things. Marty, thanks again for publicizing the protoball maps there. I have to tell you, though, that they haven't been updated. It's some programmatic thing. They haven't been updated for 2 years. So there's actually a lot more little markers there that haven't been put in yet or don't appear on the maps that you can call up. Another thing, the National Pastime, I did an article to compare newspaper mentions of baseball versus any other sport. And by 1858, it had outdone cricket and continues to outdone cricket. And there's nothing really comparable to it. So if a sport can be called a national pastime, then, then baseball would have been the national pastime, certainly before the Civil War. Card playing was probably more popular than either, but that's another story. Now, as far as the westward expansion goes, a lot of New Yorkers went to San Francisco, of course, for the gold rush, not necessarily to get gold, but to sell equipment and food to the idiots who were trying to get the gold. And so they were making a lot of money in San Francisco. And that is quite literally how the game was transferred from New York to San Francisco. But you have this kind of expansion by boat as well as by railroad, because most of America is not connected by railroad.
Right.
To give an example, New Orleans gets baseball by 1859, the same time as Baltimore. And there's no real rail connection between New York and New Orleans. It's all the shipping of the cotton back and forth. Alaska has baseball by 1867. Hawaii has baseball by 1866. And there still isn't a railroad connection between the states and those places. So got to throw in, I'm just saying you got to throw in boats as well as railroad.
I throw in everything. I use the railroad maps because they're easier to see. But your transportation networks, like you said, it's not just boats. You're following wagon trails, you're following canals, you're following whatever means of transportation that's available. But the railroad seems to be connected to all of that. Everything seems to be interconnected. So if you follow the railroads, all the other stuff more or less is connected, except maybe in the West, where if you're traveling overland, then you're subject to the trail, Chisholm Trail, or the Bozeman Trail, whatever trail you're on. Roads or turnpikes or whatever. So I didn't mean to imply that it was railroads only.
I agree completely with what you just said.
Yeah. So it's all means of transportation. Whichever way they took to get there, that's where it was going. That's how it was getting there. So thanks, Bruce.
Next up, Gary Joker. Gary, how you doing?
Oh, pretty good. Life in Oregon is treating me well.
Love to hear it.
It was a fascinating presentation. I'm curious if anyone is doing research that measures baseball as an international pastime. I'm curious about questions like, how does baseball participation compare with other sports globally over time? For example, as a changing percentage of global population? And has baseball always lagged behind sports like soccer because all that sport requires is a field and a ball?
Geez, I don't know. I don't know when soccer became supreme, say in South America or the Caribbean, because baseball by a certain point is in a lot of places where soccer is now sort of the main sport, but I don't know when soccer became the main sport, in a lot of places. I've never really researched that part of it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
I'm just wondering if some Saber geek somewhere is thinking about this.
yeah, I mean that's interesting. Think of it. I never thought of it as an international pastime before. It's always been the national pastime, but it does hold its own internationally, I think. Of course, soccer is probably the number one. Golf and basketball are up there as well, but baseball is too. So I don't know which one is supreme other than maybe soccer. But
I guess the question was partially germinated from exposure a few months ago to a podcast, and I can't remember the source, but these were baseball fans so enthusiastic about the game that they would just go from season to season and not bemoan the break that we have in the American game and just watch it wherever it was played around the world.
Well, yeah, I didn't realize that maybe they played it year round internationally. I mean, I guess I always assumed the same season everywhere.
Australia has had a professional league that plays in their summer for several years now. I think it's fallen on hard times, but I can tell you that a Australian SABR member was a big proponent of the league. So I guess you could say it's year round.
Well, yeah, I guess it would.
Yep.
Particularly Southern Hemisphere, yeah.
Andre DaCosta in the chat, his microphone is not working very well tonight. He has a couple of questions for you, Marty. Have you looked into what sports baseball replaced as town sports, i.e. cricket? And also, why did they adopt baseball and abandon these other sports so quickly?
Well, as far as cricket goes, my experience in my research is that cricket tends to be, again, either a metropolitan type of game. You're going to find it in the cities. You're going to find it at colleges. In fact, on the Eastern Shore, there was only one college at the time, and they did play cricket prior to baseball. But that's the only instance that I found of cricket being played in this area. Other accounts allude to OCAC being the game that is replaced. So, but I think in a lot of places cricket is a game that's either replaced or it coincides. Like I was talking about this guy Toadvine. He played cricket, but he was just a cricket guy. He wasn't interested in baseball until they changed the pitching. There's a second part of that question. Was there?
Let me find it because I've lost it here. Hang on just a second. The second part is, why did they adopt baseball and abandon these other sports so quickly?
I'm not sure why they would. I think one of the things is the organization of these new games appealed to them. That was part of it. The OCAT and rounders are pretty informal and flexible. Your rules are different from depending on how many people you have, the size of your field, and it's almost like pickup games when you're a kid. Where you show up, you got 11 guys, and you got to figure out how you're going to play a baseball game. So I think the formality is part of it. I think the other part of it is belonging to the club, being part of the group. And also, a lot of people, even today, join organizations that are going to help them sort of get ahead in life, and that's part of what baseball was. I mean, with the Knickerbockers and some of the early clubs they were clubs that support each other, and not just baseball. So yeah, I don't know why exactly that would be more appealing, but I think those were the reasons why.
All right, last one for tonight, and look who it is in that styling shirt. Wow, and the Expos hat. Nice, nice. It's our guy Ryan McClanahan. What's going on, Ryan?
Hey, this is awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You kind of had me thinking there about cricket and baseball, and the thing is, cricket is a game that takes forever. It's just you could play it like a day, and so they shortened cricket. But I think a lot of players who are cricket players did switch over to baseball, and it was probably just a very shorter way for them to continue and like not tire themselves out. But yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. So thank you very much.
Yeah, actually, a lot of the early, well, a lot of the players I come across from time to time, they played both, and they would play a baseball game one day, and then 2 days later they might play a cricket for somebody else. I mean, that was not unusual for players to do both. As far as cricket today is very long compared to baseball, but I've come across some baseball accounts from the 1860s that ran 4 hours plus, even 5 hours. Now, that may have been due to inexperience, and just bad ball playing, but there were games that did last that long, at least in the very beginning of the 1860s. By the 1872 rule change, however, you start seeing 2.5 hour games. And by the 1880s, you actually see if a game goes more than an hour and a half, people are getting anxious about it taking too long.
So we've been talking about pace of play now since the beginning of time, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. One of the, baseball games took a lot of times 4 hours, and you had a social game, you might have two games. So, one game might take 4 hours, but the second one, they might abbreviate it to 5 innings or something.
Yeah.
And, so that would only take about 2.5 hours. And so baseball games, a lot of times it was a social game. It was all day. By the time you traveled and you played and had the, obligatory dinner and entertainment, then, it was all day, sometimes 2 days. It might take 2 days. The transportation involved.
That lends itself to my theory that I've said a few times here on these meetings, where I believe baseball to be a conversational sport, that you can be more socially and conversationally interactive with the people that you go with to the games, as well as those around you that you just meet by sitting down next to them.
Bruce, if you don't mind, I'm going to challenge you on that one, because I was at the Met game, two Met games the last couple of weeks, and in between pitches, the loudspeakers, the pumping noise in, I can't talk to the guy next to me. It is ridiculous, and it's sensory overload. And I complained about it, but nothing's going to be done.
Well, that's that. It's funny you say that as well, Jeff, because when you back away from Major League Baseball, we talked about this earlier in the meeting tonight as well. When you back away from Major League Baseball down through the minor leagues into like New England College League or Frontier League or Futures League, and smaller leagues that I experience up here in the burgeoning metropolis of New London, New Hampshire. Don't blink when you drive through. You have that experience of it being conversational and less sensory overload. I feel your pain, because the last time I went to a Red Sox game, spot on.
It's
Spot
between
on.
every pitch, though.
Yep.
It's not bad at a bat. It's pitch to pitch.
Yep.
Gets me crazy.
Yep. This has really been great stuff. This is fascinating research and really very interesting data. And we really appreciate Marty for doing this. Join us Monday, August 25th at 7 p.m. when we have Stephen Rice, who will be with us. He will be giving his presentation, The Baseball Portraits of Carl J. Horner, 1902 to 1909. The link to sign up is available in the chapter meeting booklet and at the SABR events calendar. And finally, if you're a baseball fan watching on YouTube and you like what you see, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our weekly uploads. And if you're not yet a member, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, a premier baseball community, offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom. SABR boasts more than 35 different research committees, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world, just like Marty Payne. For more information, go to sabr.org today. Marty Payne, great stuff. You're amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Let's get everybody out of here so we can watch some baseball and converse with those around us. What do you say?
That's
We'll
right.
see everybody next Monday night. Have a good night, folks.
Thank you.